The stagecoach lurched to a stop at the edge of Redemption Creek, sending up clouds of dust that hung in the scorching afternoon air. The town sprawled before them like a sun-bleached skeleton, its weathered buildings huddled against the merciless heat of the high desert. In the distance, the jagged peaks of the Sierra Nevada stood like sentinels against a sky so vast it made the soul ache. Among the weary travelers stepping down from the coach, one figure drew immediate attention, not for any striking beauty or fine clothes, but for the very opposite. She was thin as a rail fence, her calico dress torn at the hem and stained with the dust of countless miles. Dark hair hung limp around a face that might have been pretty once, before hunger and fear had carved hollows beneath her cheekbones. The girl, for she couldn't have been more than 20, clutched a threadbare carpetbag to her chest as if it contained all the treasures of the world. Her eyes, the color of sage in shadow, darted nervously from face to face, searching for threats in every stranger's gaze. "Move along, girl," the driver growled, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "This ain't no place for dawdling." She flinched at his harsh tone but obeyed, stepping down into the dusty street with the movements that spoke of exhaustion barely held at bay. The other passengers gave her a wide berth, their faces pinched with the particular brand of contempt reserved for those who wore their misfortune like a second skin. A woman in bombazine and lace sniffed loudly as she passed. "Lord knows what kind of trouble follows that sort," she muttered to her companion, loud enough for the girl to hear. "Mark my words, decent folk won't stand for it." The girl's shoulders hunched further, but she kept walking, her worn boots making barely a sound on the packed earth. She had learned long ago that invisibility was her best defense, that drawing attention meant inviting pain. But in a town like Redemption Creek, a stranger was about as invisible as a coyote in a chicken coop. She hadn't gone 10 steps before the first catcall rang out from the saloon porch. "Well, well, boys, looks like the stage brought us a little lost lamb." 3 men lounged against the railing, their eyes glittering with the cruel amusement of those who found sport in others' misfortune. The largest of them, a brute with arms like ham hocks and breath that could strip paint, pushed himself upright and sauntered toward her. "Where you headed, sweet thing? Ain't many places in town for a lady traveling alone." His emphasis on the word lady made it clear he thought her anything but. The girl quickened her pace, but the man's longer strides easily kept pace. His hand shot out, grasping her elbow with fingers that bit like iron shackles. "Now don't be unfriendly. We're just trying to welcome you proper-like." Panic flared in her eyes. Wild and desperate as a trapped animal's, she wrenched against his grip, her carpetbag falling forgotten to the ground. "Please let me go. I don't want any trouble." "Trouble?" The man's laugh was ugly, drawing chuckles from his companions. "We ain't trouble, darlin'. We're downright hospitable." His free hand reached for her face, and something inside her snapped like a too-tight wire, with a cry that was part fear, part fury. She raked her nails across his cheek, leaving bloody furrows in their wake. The man bellowed, releasing her to clutch his face. "You little wildcat! I'll teach you some manners." She ran then, abandoning her pitiful bag of possessions, her feet flying over the uneven ground. Behind her, boots pounded and voices shouted, promising retribution for her defiance. The respectable citizens of Redemption Creek watched from doorways and windows, none moving to help. After all, a girl like that, traveling alone, dressed in rags, fighting off men in the street, well, she must have brought it on herself somehow. The chase led through winding alleys, past corrals reeking of manure and fear sweat, always with those terrible voices growing closer. Her lungs burned, her legs trembled, and she knew with the clarity of the desperate that she couldn't run much longer. That's when she saw it, a massive gate of wrought iron, standing open like the entrance to another world. Beyond it, she glimpsed green pastures stretching toward the horizon, neat fences marking boundaries that seemed to promise order in a world gone mad. Without thinking, driven by instinct alone, she veered through the gate. Her strength gave out 20 yards past the entrance. Her foot caught in a rut, sending her sprawling face first into the dirt. She lay there gasping, waiting for rough hands to seize her, for the nightmare to continue its inevitable course. Instead, she heard a different sound, the measured tread of boots. Slower, more deliberate than her pursuers. A shadow fell across her, blocking out the merciless sun. She forced herself to look up, expecting to see another face twisted with lust or contempt. What she saw instead was a man who seemed carved from the very mountains that dominated the horizon. Tall and broad-shouldered, with silver threading through dark hair and a face weathered by wind and sun into something approaching stone. His clothes spoke of money, fine wool and tooled leather, but his stance spoke of something else entirely, power, perhaps, or danger carefully leashed. He stood a careful distance away, his hands visible and empty at his sides. When he spoke, his voice was low and measured, like distant thunder. "Are you hurt?" The question, simple as it was, seemed to break something inside her. All the terror, all the exhaustion, all the desperate flight crystallized into a single, primal response. She scrambled backward, her hands clawing at the dirt, until her back hit the gatepost. Her voice, when it came, was raw and fierce with desperation. "I'll kill you if you touch me!" The words hung in the air between them like a thrown knife. The man went very still, something flickering in his gray eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. For a long moment, they stayed frozen in that tableau. The ragged girl pressed against the post, trembling like a wild thing, and the man standing motionless as a statue. Then, slowly, deliberately, he took a step back, then another. His movements were careful, calculated not to startle, the way a man might move around an injured wolf. "No one's going to touch you," he said, and there was something in his voice, not pity, exactly, but understanding, as if he knew what it was to be cornered, to have nothing left but threats and the will to use them. He turned his head slightly, and she saw other figures approaching, ranch hands by their dress, their faces curious but wary. The man made a gesture, and they stopped well back. "Samuel," he called to a grizzled older man who seemed to be some sort of foreman. "Have Mrs. Chen prepare the guest room in the main house. Our visitor needs rest and a meal." "Sir." The foreman's tone held a question, his eyes taking in the girl's appearance with obvious doubt. "You heard me." There was steel in the words now, the kind that brooked no argument. The girl watched this exchange through a haze of exhaustion and confusion. This wasn't how the world worked. Men didn't step back when threatened by a slip of a girl. They didn't offer food and shelter to ragged strangers who brought trouble in their wake. I can't pay," she managed to say, hating how her voice shook. The man studied her for a moment, and she had the unsettling feeling he could see straight through to her soul. "I didn't ask for payment. Can you stand?" She tried, but her legs had turned to water. The world tilted dangerously, black spots dancing at the edges of her vision. She heard him curse softly, not at her, she realized with dim surprise, but at the situation. "Samuel, send for the doctor, and tell those fools at the gate that if they set one foot on my property, they'll answer to me personally." Through the gathering darkness, she heard boots retreating rapidly. Apparently, her pursuers had followed as far as the gate, but no further. Even in her state, she understood what that meant. Whoever this man was, his word carried weight in Redemption Creek. "You're safe here," he said, and though she couldn't see him clearly anymore, she heard the quiet conviction in his voice. "No one will hurt you on my land." Safe. The word was foreign as Chinese silk, impossible as snow in July. She wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, but all that came out was a broken sob. Then the darkness rose up like a tide, and she knew no more. The last thing she heard was his voice, giving orders in that same steady tone, arranging her rescue as matter-of-factly as he might organize a cattle drive. And somewhere in the depths of her unconscious mind, a tiny seed of something that might have been hope began to unfurl its first tentative leaf. She woke to sunlight filtering through lace curtains, a sight so foreign it took her several heartbeats to remember where she was. The bed beneath her was softer than anything she'd known in years. the sheets smelling of lavender and lye soap. For a moment, she lay perfectly still, afraid that any movement might shatter this strange dream and return her to the nightmare of yesterday. The room was simple but well appointed. Polished wood floors, a washstand with a porcelain basin, a wardrobe that likely held more space than she'd need for her non-existent belongings. Through the window, she could see the ranch spreading out like a kingdom unto itself, vast and orderly in a way that made her chest tight with something between longing and fear. A soft knock at the door sent her scrambling upright, clutching the covers to her chest. An elderly Chinese woman entered, carrying a tray that steamed with the promise of food. Her face was kind but cautious, the expression of someone who'd learned to reserve judgment. "You eat," the woman said in accented English, setting the tray on the bedside table. "Mr. Wade says you rest. Get strong. I am Mrs. Chen." Mr. Wade. So that was his name. The man who'd stood like a mountain between her and her pursuers. The man who'd stepped back when she'd threatened him. Who'd seen her not as prey, but as something worth protecting. Thank you," she managed, her voice rusty with disuse. "But I should go. I don't want to cause trouble." "Mrs." Chen's expression softened slightly. "Mr. Wade's ranch. Mr. Wade's rules. You stay until he says otherwise." She paused at the door. "Bath water coming soon? Your dress. I wash and mend." Alone again. She forced herself to eat, though her stomach roiled with anxiety. The food was simple but good. Biscuits and gravy, eggs, thick slices of bacon, ranch food, meant to fuel hard work under an unforgiving sun. She ate slowly, half expecting someone to burst in and snatch it away. Through the window, she watched the ranch come alive with the morning's work. Cowboys moved among the corrals, their movements efficient and purposeful. Horses whinnied and cattle lowed, the sounds carrying on the clear air. It was a world that ran on its own rhythms, seemingly untouched by the chaos that had driven her here. She was still watching when she saw him, Mr. Wade, moving among his men with the easy authority of someone who'd earned rather than inherited his position. Even from a distance, she could see how the cowboys straightened when he approached, how they listened when he spoke. He wasn't the largest man out there, but he didn't need to be. Power sat on his shoulders like a well-worn coat. A knock interrupted her observations. This time it was a younger woman, Mexican by her features, carrying buckets of steaming water. Together, they filled a hip bath that had been tucked behind a screen. The girl, who introduced herself as Rosa, chattered pleasantly as she worked, seemingly unbothered by her guest's silence. "You're lucky Signor Wade found you," Rosa said, testing the water temperature. "He's a good man, not like some others in town, fair to his workers, pays honest wages." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "They say he could buy half of California if he wanted, but he stays here, working the land like any vaquero." The bath was heaven and torment combined. Heaven for the warmth that seeped into her bones, torment for the vulnerability of it. She bathed quickly, efficiently, always listening for footsteps that might signal danger. Old habits died hard, and some never died at all. Clean and dressed in a simple but well-made dress that Mrs. Chen had somehow procured. She felt more human than she had in months, also more visible. Clean clothes and a clean face meant she couldn't hide behind dirt and desperation anymore. A firm knock made her jump. Mr. Wade would like to speak with you, if you're feeling up to it." The voice belonged to the foreman she'd glimpsed yesterday, Samuel. She wanted to refuse, to hide in this room until she could slip away unnoticed. But she owed the man that much at least, to face him and thank him before she disappeared. She followed Samuel through hallways lined with Indian rugs and photographs of cattle drives, each step taking her deeper into this strange new world. The study where Samuel led her was a reflection of its owner, functional but refined, with leather-bound books lining the walls and maps of the territory spread across a massive desk. Wade stood with his back to them, gazing out a window that framed the mountains beyond. "Thank you, Samuel," he said without turning. The foreman left, closing the door with a soft click that sounded loud as a gunshot to her nerves. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Wade turned, and she got her first clear look at the man who'd saved her. He was perhaps 45, with the kind of face that had seen too much to be called handsome, but carried something more valuable: character. Lines mapped years of squinting into harsh sun, and a scar ran along his jawline, white against sun-darkened skin. "Please, sit," he said, gesturing to a chair, when she remained standing, ready to flee. He sighed and took his own seat behind the desk. "I'm not going to hurt you. I thought we established that yesterday." "Why?" The word burst out before she could stop it. "Why help me? You don't know me. I could be anyone, anything." "You could be," he agreed, his gray eyes steady on hers. "But I know what fear looks like. Real fear. The kind that comes from experience, not imagination." He leaned back, his hands loosely clasped. "I've seen that look before. Worn it myself. Truth be told." She sank into the chair then, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "I can work," she said quickly. "To pay for the room, the food. I can cook, clean, mend. What's your name?" The question, simple as it was, stopped her cold. She'd had so many names, worn so many identities trying to disappear, but something about this man, this moment, demanded truth. "Margaret," she whispered. "Margaret Sullivan." "Irish," he noted with the ghost of a smile. "That explains the fight in you. I'm Nathan Wade, and you're welcome to stay as long as you need. Miss Sullivan. This ranch has more work than hands to do it, if you're inclined to earn your keep, but there's no debt between us. Sometimes a man does a thing because it's right, not because he expects payment." She stared at him, searching for the trap, the hidden price that always came with kindness. Men don't. People don't just help strangers, not without wanting something. His expression darkened, and she glimpsed something raw beneath the controlled exterior. "No," he said quietly. "They don't, which is why when someone does, it matters." He stood abruptly, moving back to the window. "This ranch runs on rules. Miss Sullivan, my men know to keep their distance from the main house. You'll have work if you want it. Wages same as any hand, but you're under my protection here, and that means something in these parts." Until when? She had to know, had to understand the boundaries of this impossible sanctuary. He turned back to her, and there was something in his eyes she couldn't name, a recognition, perhaps, of one damaged soul to another. "Until you're ready to leave. Could be tomorrow, could be never. That's your choice to make. And if trouble follows me here, if someone comes looking," his smile then was sharp as a blade, "let them come. I've dealt with worse than whatever's chasing you. Miss Sullivan, this land, these people, they're mine to protect. You're under that umbrella now, like it or not." She should have been frightened by the intensity in his voice, the implied violence. Instead, she felt something unknot in her chest, a tension she'd carried so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. "I don't understand you," she admitted. "No need to. Just know that Double W Ranch is a place where the past can stay buried if that's what a person needs." He moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "Mrs. Chen will show you around, introduce you to the work routines if you're interested. Take your time deciding. And Miss Sullivan?" She looked up at him. "This strange man who offered safety without price. That promise you made yesterday, about what would happen if someone touched you. Keep that fire. It'll serve you well out here." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with her confusion and the first fragile stirrings of something that might, impossibly, be hope. Through the window, she watched him stride back toward the corrals, rejoining the world of cattle and horses and men who followed him without question. Nathan Wade, who built an empire in this harsh land but couldn't save whatever he'd lost before, who saw her terror and answered it not with exploitation but with understanding. Margaret Sullivan sat in that leather chair for a long time, feeling the solid walls around her, the safety they represented. Outside, The ranch continued its ancient rhythms, and slowly, carefully, she began to believe that she might find a place within them. The nightmares came like clockwork, dragging her from sleep with phantom hands at her throat and a scream trapped behind clenched teeth. Margaret shot upright, her nightgown soaked with cold sweat, heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was, the room too fine, the bed too soft, the silence too complete. Then memory returned. Wade's ranch, safety, or what passed for it in her fractured world. She'd been here 3 weeks now, falling into the rhythm of ranch life with the desperate gratitude of someone given an unexpected reprieve. Mrs. Chen had put her to work in the kitchen garden, knowing somehow that Margaret needed the feel of earth between her fingers, needed to nurture something after so much destruction. But the past wasn't content to stay buried beneath Wyoming soil. It had started as fragments, a laugh that sounded too familiar in town, a glimpse of a hat that made her stomach clench. Then came the dreams, more vivid each night, until she could smell his cologne, feel his hands, hear his voice promising things that made her wish for death. "You can't hide from me, Maggie. You're mine, bought and paid for, till death do us part. Remember?" Jonathan Hartley. Even thinking his name made her hands shake. The man her father had sold her to, though they'd called it marriage to make it respectable. A successful merchant from St. Louis with a fine house and a reputation for piety that had fooled everyone, including her desperate family. No one had seen what lay beneath that civilized veneer until the ring was on her finger and the doors were closed. Margaret forced herself out of bed, knowing sleep would bring no peace. The ranch was quiet in the pre-dawn darkness, but she'd learned its sounds. The distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods, the creak of the windmill turning lazily. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and slipped out onto the kitchen porch, seeking the clean bite of night air. She wasn't alone. A figure sat on the porch steps, shoulders hunched, a cigarette glowing orange in the darkness. Nathan Wade turned at her approach, and even in the dim light, she could see the hollowness in his eyes that meant his own ghosts had come calling. Couldn't sleep either. His voice was rough, scraped raw by whatever memories haunted him. She hesitated, then settled on the step below him, maintaining careful distance. They'd developed an odd companionship over the weeks, two damaged souls recognizing their kinship without needing to speak of it. He never asked about her past. She never questioned the way he sometimes stared at nothing, seeing things that weren't there. "Bad dreams," she admitted, pulling the shawl tighter. "Ah." He took a long draw from his cigarette, exhaling smoke into the star-studded sky. "Those I understand." They sat in silence for a while, watching the eastern horizon begin to pale. Then he spoke, so quietly she almost missed it. "Her name was Clara. My wife. Lakota War Party hit our place while I was away on business. Found her and our boy when I got back. James was only 6. Margaret's breath caught. She'd wondered about the shadows that lived in his eyes, but hearing it spoken aloud was different. "I'm sorry. 12 years ago now. Sold that land. Couldn't stomach it. Came here, built all this." He gestured at the sprawling ranch. "Thought if I worked hard enough, accumulated enough, it might fill the hole they left behind." A bitter smile twisted his lips. "Turns out you can't buy your way out of grief." "Who knew? Is that why you helped me? Because you understand what it's like to run from ghosts?" He considered this, crushing out his cigarette. "Maybe, or maybe I just recognized the look of someone who'd been broken by another person's cruelty. Different kind of ghost, but just as hungry." She wanted to tell him then, about Jonathan, about the marriage that had been a prettily decorated prison, about the night she'd finally found the courage to run. But the words stuck in her throat like broken glass. Some truths were too ugly for the clean morning air. "He'll come for me," she said instead. "The man I'm running from. He doesn't like losing what he considers his property." Nathan's expression hardened, and she glimpsed the iron that had built an empire in this unforgiving land. "Let him come. I've buried better men than some Eastern dandy who gets his courage from terrorizing women. The sun broke the horizon then, painting the mountains in shades of rose and gold. Margaret watched the light spread across the land, chasing away shadows, and felt something ease in her chest. Not peace, she was too damaged for that, but perhaps the possibility of it. The moment shattered with the sound of approaching hooves. A rider was coming hard from the direction of town, his horse lathered with sweat. Nathan rose smoothly, his hand moving instinctively to the pistol he wore, even in the supposed safety of his own land. But it was only Samuel, his weathered face grim with news. "Boss, we got trouble in town. That fellow who was asking questions about a young woman. He's posted a reward, $500 for information about his runaway wife." Margaret's world tilted. $500 was a fortune to most folks in Redemption Creek, more than enough to loosen tongues and dissolve loyalties. She stood on trembling legs, already calculating how far she could get before Jonathan found her trail. "What fellow?" Nathan's voice was dangerously quiet. "Name of Hartley. Says his poor wife was kidnapped by outlaws, that she's touched in the head and needs caring for." Samuel spat tobacco juice, his opinion of that story clear. "Got a couple of Pinkerton men with him. They're making rounds, showing a photograph." "A photograph?" Margaret's hand went to her throat. The wedding portrait. Of course, Jonathan's favorite, where she looked young and innocent and untouched by his particular brand of love. "Pack your things," Nathan said abruptly. "Both of you. We're going to the line shack up in the mountains for a few days. Cattle need checking anyway." "Sir?" Samuel looked confused. "You heard me. Get provisions for a week. We leave in an hour." He turned to Margaret, and his eyes were fierce. "You're not running. Not this time. We're going to face this down, but we do it smart. Up in the mountains, we control the ground. I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm telling." His hand brushed her shoulder, the briefest touch. "You said you'd kill anyone who touched you." "Well, I believe you, but sometimes it's better to have help holding the knife." An hour later, they rode out. Nathan, Margaret, Samuel, and two trusted hands named Tom and Miguel. The line shack was a day's ride into the mountains, a rough cabin used during roundups and storms. Margaret had never been on horseback for so long, but she gritted her teeth against the pain, determined not to slow them down. As they climbed higher, the air grew thin and sharp. The landscape changed from sage and scrub to pine and aspen, the trees whispering secrets in the wind. Nathan rode beside her, watchful and silent, while the others ranged ahead and behind. "Why are you doing this?" she asked as they watered the horses at a mountain stream. "You could just turn me over. Save yourself the trouble." He looked at her for a long moment, then pulled something from his saddlebag, a worn photograph of a woman and child, edges soft from handling. "Because some things are worth the trouble. Because a man who doesn't protect what's under his roof isn't much of a man. And because—" he paused, seemed to struggle with the words. "Because you remind me that not all battles are lost before they're fought." They reached the line shack as shadows lengthened into evening. It was rough but sturdy, with thick walls and a clear view of the approach. The men set about securing the horses and supplies while Margaret helped prepare a simple meal. The domesticity of it, cooking beside armed men preparing for possible violence, should have been surreal. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. That night, as they sat around the fire, Tom told stories of his days fighting in the war between the states. Miguel sang Mexican ballads in a voice sweet as honey. Samuel whittled, creating a small horse from a chunk of pine, and Nathan watched it all with eyes that seemed less haunted than usual, as if protecting someone else's life had given his own meaning again. Margaret understood then that she'd found more than sanctuary at the Double W. She'd found a family of sorts, broken people who'd learned to stand together because standing alone was too hard. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to face whatever came riding up from the valley below. The mountains stood eternal around them, and for tonight at least, she let herself believe in their protection. The mountain morning arrived crisp and clear, with frost silvering the pine needles and breath misting in the thin air. Margaret woke to find Nathan already gone, his bedroll neatly folded by the dying embers of the fire. Through the cabin's small window, she could see him standing on a rocky outcrop, field glasses trained on the valley below. She'd learned to read the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself when trouble was expected. This was a man who'd survived Indian raids and range wars, who'd built his empire through will and wariness in equal measure. Now he stood guard over her safety with the same fierce attention he'd once given to protecting his family. Too late for them, but not for her. "Coffee's on," Samuel said quietly from his post by the door. The older man had taken the last watch, his rifle across his knees. "Boss spotted dust about an hour ago. Riders coming up the south trail." Margaret's hands trembled as she poured coffee, the tin cup chattering against the pot. 3 days they'd been in the mountains, 3 days of waiting and watching, of jumping at every snapped twig and shifted shadow. Part of her wanted it over with, even if that meant facing Jonathan. The waiting was its own kind of torture. Nathan returned as the others were waking, his face grim. 5 riders. "They'll be here by noon if they keep their pace." He met Margaret's eyes across the small space. "One of them matches your husband's description." Husband. The word tasted like ashes. "He's not my—" She stopped, swallowing hard. In the eyes of the law, Jonathan Hartley owned her as surely as he owned his fine house and imported carriages. That piece of paper they'd signed gave him rights that no amount of running could dissolve. "He's not anything once he sets foot on my land with harmful intent," Nathan finished for her. "Tom, Miguel, take positions in the rocks above the trail. Don't show yourselves unless needed. Samuel, you're with me." "And me?" Margaret asked, though she dreaded the answer. "You stay inside. Bar the door. There's a rifle by the window if things go badly." He paused, something softening in his expression. "But they won't. I've faced down worse odds than 5 city men playing at frontier justice." The morning crawled by with agonizing slowness. Margaret tried to busy herself, cleaning the already clean cabin, checking and rechecking the rifle Nathan had left her, forcing down hardtack and jerky though her stomach rebelled. Through it all, memories crashed over her like waves. Jonathan's face on their wedding night, the mask of civility slipping to reveal something cruel beneath. His hands, soft from easy living but strong enough to leave bruises where they wouldn't show. The locked doors, the servants paid to be deaf and blind, the long nights when she'd prayed for death as a release. And then, worse than the violence, the moments of twisted tenderness, the gifts that came with invisible chains attached, the public displays of husbandly devotion that made her skin crawl, the way he'd stroke her hair and tell her she was lucky to have a man who loved her enough to correct her failures. "They're coming," Samuel called softly from outside. Margaret moved to the window, peering through the gap in the shutters. The riders were visible now, picking their way up the narrow trail. Her heart seized as she recognized Jonathan's pale hair, his fastidious posture even on horseback. He'd dressed for the frontier in what he imagined was appropriate. New boots, pristine duster, a hat that had never seen honest wear. The 2 Pinkerton men rode with professional alertness, hands near their weapons. 2 local guides completed the party. Nathan stepped out of the cabin's shadow, Samuel flanking him. Both men held rifles with the easy familiarity of those who'd used them for more than show. Nathan had positioned himself on a flat rock that gave him the high ground, forcing the riders to look up at him. "That's far enough, gentlemen." Nathan's voice carried clearly in the mountain air. "State your business." Jonathan urged his horse forward, trying to project authority despite his obvious discomfort in the saddle. "I'm looking for my wife. I have reason to believe she's being held at your ranch against her will." "No one's being held anywhere against their will on my land," Nathan replied evenly. "Can't say the same for other places, though." Margaret saw Jonathan's face flush at the implication. "I demand you produce her immediately. I have legal documents proving she's my wife, and these men are authorized to retrieve her." "Legal documents?" Nathan's laugh was cold as the mountain wind. Yes, I imagine you do. Amazing what money can buy in the way of legal documents, bills of sale, marriage certificates that might as well be ownership papers. How dare you? How dare I? Nathan's voice dropped dangerously. I'll tell you what I dare, Mr. Hartley. I dare to offer sanctuary to any soul that needs it. I dare to stand between predators and their prey. And I dare to tell you that you'll ride back down this mountain empty-handed, or you won't ride down at all. One of the Pinkerton men, older and clearly experienced, studied the terrain with knowing eyes. He'd spotted the strategic positions, the places where men with rifles could make the trail a killing ground. Mr. Hartley, he said quietly, perhaps we should discuss this reasonably. There's nothing to discuss. Jonathan's composure cracked, revealing the ugliness beneath. She's mine. I paid her father's debts, saved their whole worthless family from ruin. She owes me. She owes you nothing. The words came from Margaret herself as she stepped out of the cabin. She couldn't hide anymore, couldn't let others fight her battles while she cowered inside. Her hands shook, but her voice was steady. I paid any debt in blood and tears. Jonathan, the ledger is clear. Maggie. His voice shifted to the honeyed tone she remembered too well, the one that preceded either violence or twisted affection. Darling, you're confused. These people have filled your head with lies. Come home with me, and all will be forgiven. No. The word hung between them like a bridge burned beyond repair. Margaret felt Nathan shift slightly, positioning himself between her and the riders. Not blocking her. He was too smart for that, but ready to move if needed. Jonathan's mask slipped entirely then, his handsome features twisting into something monstrous. You stupid little... You think you can just walk away? You think any court in the country won't send you back where you belong? I'll have you declared insane, locked away where you can't embarrass me further. Try it, Nathan said conversationally. Of course, you'd have to leave this mountain first, and I'm not entirely certain that's going to happen. The second Pinkerton man cleared his throat. Mr. Wade, I understand you have considerable influence in these parts. But interfering with the lawful recovery of a man's wife. What I see, Nathan interrupted, is a woman standing free on my land, making her own choices. What I see is a man who speaks of ownership rather than love, who threatens rather than persuades. In my book, that's not a husband. That's a man who needs to learn that some things can't be bought or bullied. You can't protect her forever, Jonathan snarled. I'll bring an army if I have to. I'll see your ranch burned, your cattle scattered. The distinctive click of multiple rifles being cocked echoed off the rocks. Tom and Miguel had revealed themselves, along with two other ranch hands Margaret hadn't even known were there. All held weapons trained on the party below. The older Pinkerton raised his hands carefully. Mr. Hartley, I think it's time we withdrew. This isn't going to be resolved with threats. Listen to your man, Nathan advised. He's got the right of it. Turn around, ride back to wherever you came from. And if you're smart, you'll keep riding until you hit the Pacific. This isn't over, Jonathan promised, but Margaret heard the fear beneath the bravado. He was a man who terrorized those weaker than himself, who operated in a world of locked doors and social proprieties. Here in the mountains, faced with hard men who'd carved lives from an unforgiving land, he was exposed as the coward he'd always been. Yes, Margaret said quietly, stepping fully into the open. It is over. Jonathan, you don't own me. You never did. Marriage isn't slavery, whatever you might believe. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the wedding ring she'd carried all these months, not from sentiment, but as a reminder of what she'd escaped. With steady hands, she threw it at his horse's feet. Take that back with you. Sell it. Throw it away. I don't care. But know this, I'll die before I go back to you, and these men will help me make that stand. For a moment, violence trembled in the air like heat shimmer. Then the older Pinkerton took charge, wheeling his horse around. We're leaving, Mr. Hartley. Now, whatever claim you might have, it won't be settled with blood on a mountainside. Jonathan stared at Margaret, and she saw in his eyes the moment he truly understood. She was beyond his reach now, protected by something stronger than law or money or social convention. With a snarl of rage, he yanked his horse around, spurring it cruelly as he fled back down the trail. The others followed more sedately, the professionals among them keeping watchful eyes on the positions above. Only when the dust of their passage had settled did Nathan lower his rifle. "Well," he said mildly, "that was interesting." Margaret found herself laughing, high and slightly wild. The sound echoed off the mountains, carrying all her fear and relief and desperate hope. Then she was crying, great gasping sobs that shook her whole frame. Nathan approached slowly, telegraphing his movements. When she didn't pull away, he rested a hand on her shoulder, warm, steady, asking nothing. "You did well. Took courage to face him down like that." "He'll be back," she managed between sobs. "With more men, with legal papers, with—" "Let him come," Nathan said simply. "I've got the best lawyers money can buy, and judges who owe me favors from here to San Francisco. We'll fight him in court if we have to, with bullets if he pushes it that far. Either way, you're not going back to that life." She looked up at him through tear-blurred eyes. This man who'd made himself her champion for reasons she still didn't fully understand. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care so much?" He was quiet for a long moment, his hand still warm on her shoulder. "Because I couldn't save them," he said finally. "My wife, my son. I couldn't protect what mattered most. But maybe I can protect you. Maybe that's enough to balance the scales a little." Around them, the mountains stood eternal and indifferent, but Margaret felt their shelter nonetheless. She'd thrown away her ring, spoken her defiance, chosen her ground, and for the first time since the night she'd fled Jonathan's house, she truly believed she might survive this. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning frost, and life in the line shack returned to its rhythms. But something had shifted, some barrier crossed. They were bound together now, all of them, by more than circumstance. They were bound by the choice to stand and fight. The trouble started small, like sparks from a distant fire carried on an ill wind. First, it was the water. The stream that fed the eastern pastures ran muddy one morning, fouled upstream by someone who'd driven cattle through it repeatedly. Then came the cut fences, professionally done in the dead of night, allowing prize breeding stock to scatter across the desert. Nathan's men spent 3 days rounding them up, and still they lost a dozen head to coyotes and thirst. Margaret watched Nathan's face grow harder with each incident, the lines around his eyes deepening as he studied maps and conferred with Samuel in low, urgent tones. She knew this was her fault. Jonathan's money reaching out like poison, turning neighbor against neighbor, hired gun against honest rancher. "Let me go," she said one evening as they sat on the porch, watching storm clouds mass over the mountains. "This is my fight, not yours. Your men shouldn't suffer for my troubles." Nathan didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on the horizon where lightning flickered in sheets of pale fire. "You know, Clara used to say the same thing when the Indian trouble started. Said I should send her back east where it was safe, not risk the ranch for her sake." He paused, rolling a cigarette with steady hands. "I told her then what I'll tell you now. When you take someone under your protection, you don't withdraw it when the weather turns rough. That's when it matters most. This is different. Jonathan won't stop until what? Until he destroys everything I've built trying to get to you." Nathan's laugh was harsh. "Let him try. I've been fighting one thing or another since I was 15. At least this time. I'm fighting for something worthwhile." The next morning brought worse news. Tom rode in at dawn, his horse lathered and his face grim. "Boss, they hit the line shack at Cougar Creek. Burned it to the ground. Jake and Pete got out, but Jake took a bullet in the shoulder." Nathan's expression could have been carved from granite. "How many?" Pete counted 8, maybe 10. Professional guns, not local talent. They wore masks, but one of them had a city accent, kept saying something about retrieving property. "Sss," Margaret felt her knees buckle, but forced herself to remain standing. This was escalating beyond harassment into war, and men were bleeding because of her. Good men who'd shown her nothing but rough kindness and respect. "Double the guard on the main house," Nathan ordered. "Pull everyone back from the outer line shacks. We'll make our stand here where we can defend properly." He turned to Margaret, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not blame, but determination, fierce as flame. "They want to make this a siege? Fine, we'll show them how the West handles sieges." The next days blurred together in preparation and mounting tension. The ranch transformed into an armed camp, with men walking patrol and weapons always within reach. Margaret threw herself into work, helping Mrs. Chen prepare meals for the extra guards, tending Jake's wound with hands that barely shook, mending clothes torn by barbed wire and rough riding. At night, she and Nathan often found themselves alone on the porch, two souls unable to sleep while danger prowled the perimeter. They talked in the darkness, about books, about dreams deferred, about the strange paths that had brought them to this moment. "I wanted to be a teacher once," Margaret confided one night as they watched heat lightning dance across the sky. "Before Father's debts, before Jonathan, I had a position offered at a school in Boston." "What stopped you?" She laughed bitterly. "Family duty. Father said I owed it to them to marry well, to save them from ruin. Jonathan seemed like salvation then, wealthy, respectable, charming when he wanted to be." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I learned too late that salvation can wear the devil's face." Nathan was quiet for a long moment. "We all make bargains we regret. I came out here to build something lasting, something that would outlive me. Thought if I accumulated enough land, enough cattle, enough money, it would mean something, fill the hole Clara and James left behind." He gestured at the sprawling ranch, barely visible in the darkness. "Turns out you can't replace people with things, but maybe you can honor their memory by protecting others. Is that what I am to you? A way to honor their memory?" He turned to look at her then, and even in the dim light, she could see the intensity in his gaze. "At first, maybe. Now?" He shook his head slowly. "Now you're Margaret Sullivan, who faces down her demons with steel in her spine, who works alongside my men without complaint, who brings something to this place that's been missing for 12 years. What's that?" "Hope," he said simply. "The possibility that life holds more than just endurance." Before she could respond, the night exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like deadly fireflies. Men shouted, glass shattered, and the air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder. "Inside," Nathan roared, pushing Margaret toward the door as bullets whined overhead. She grabbed the rifle kept by the entrance, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. This was it, Jonathan's final play. Hiring enough guns to take what he wanted by force. The battle raged through the night, a symphony of violence that ebbed and flowed like a tide. Nathan's men held their positions, returning fire with disciplined volleys, but the attackers had numbers and seemed willing to spend lives freely. Margaret found herself at an upstairs window, laying down covering fire while Rosa reloaded rifles with practiced efficiency. "There!" Rosa pointed to shadows creeping along the corral fence. Margaret sighted carefully, remembering Nathan's lessons, and squeezed the trigger. One shadow stumbled and fell. The others retreated to better cover. Dawn came slowly, revealing the carnage. 3 of Nathan's men were wounded, though none fatally. The attacking force had pulled back, leaving 4 of their number dead in the yard. Among them, Margaret recognized one of the Pinkerton men who'd accompanied Jonathan to the mountain. "They'll regroup," Samuel said, his arm in a makeshift sling. "Hit us again tonight, probably with fire this time. Try to burn us out." Nathan studied the situation with the cold calculation of a man who'd survived too many battles to indulge in false hope. "Miguel, ride for town. Tell Sheriff Watson what's happening here. Make sure he understands this is an illegal assault on my property." "You think he'll come?" Tom asked skeptically. The sheriff was a political creature, careful not to offend those with money and influence. "He'll come," Nathan said grimly. "Or he'll find himself looking for new employment come election time. I've been patient with the law, given it a chance to work. Now it's time to remind certain people that I didn't build this ranch by turning the other cheek." As Miguel rode out, Margaret approached Nathan. Blood seeped through a tear in his shirt where a bullet had grazed him, and exhaustion carved deep lines in his face. "You're hurt. It's nothing." But he didn't pull away when she led him inside to tend the wound. As she cleaned and bandaged the graze, she felt the weight of all the violence crushing down on her. "This has to stop," she whispered. "Too many people are getting hurt. I won't have more blood on my conscience." His hand covered hers, warm and calloused. "The only blood on anyone's conscience belongs to the man who started this. You didn't ask for violence. You asked for freedom. There's no shame in defending that. But at what cost? Whatever it takes." He said simply, "Some things are worth any price. You're one of them." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Outside, Nathan's men prepared for another assault, checking weapons and strengthening defenses. The ranch had become a battlefield, but also something more, a place where broken people made their stand, where the rejected and damaged chose to fight rather than run. As the sun climbed higher, baking the earth and making the air shimmer with heat, a dust cloud appeared on the southern horizon. Too large for a single rider, too organized for another attack. As it drew closer, Margaret made out a column of riders, 20 or more, led by a man wearing a sheriff's star. But it was the figure riding beside the sheriff that made her heart sink. Jonathan Hartley had come to watch his investment in violence pay off. His fine clothes were dusty now, his face haggard, but his eyes still held that possessive gleam that haunted her nightmares. "Nathan Wade," Sheriff Watson called out, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "I'm here to restore order and enforce the law. Tell your men to put down their weapons." Nathan stepped out onto the porch, his rifle held casually but ready. Margaret moved to stand beside him, no longer willing to hide while others fought her battles. "Happy to put down our weapons, Sheriff," Nathan replied evenly. "Soon as you arrest the men who've been attacking my property and shooting my hands." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Mister, Hartley claims he's merely trying to recover stolen property. Says you're harboring his lawfully wedded wife against her will." "I'm standing right here of my own free will," Margaret called out, her voice clear and strong. "And I'll not go with him, law or no law." Jonathan spurred his horse forward, his face twisted with rage. "You belong to me. The law says—" "The law says a lot of things," Nathan interrupted. "It also says a man can't burn another man's property, can't shoot his employees, can't wage private war on his land. You want to talk about law, Hartley? Let's talk about the warrants I'll be swearing out for arson, attempted murder, and destruction of property." The sheriff looked between the two men, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. Around the yard, Nathan's men stood ready, outnumbered but holding superior positions, the moment balanced on a knife's edge, ready to tip into bloodshed with a single wrong word. The sun hung like a brass coin in the merciless sky, baking the earth until the air shimmered with heat waves. In the yard of the Double W Ranch, two small armies faced each other across a space that might as well have been an ocean. Margaret could feel the tension thrumming like a taut wire, ready to snap with deadly consequences. Sheriff Watson mopped his brow with a grimy handkerchief, clearly out of his depth. "Now, Mr. Wade, surely we can settle this peacefully, Mr. Hartley has shown me legal documentation. Legal documentation can be bought as easily as beef in this country." Nathan cut him off, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from years of commanding men. "What about the documentation for the crimes committed on my land, my burned line shack, my wounded men?" "Lies and exaggeration," Jonathan snarled. But Margaret noticed how his hired guns shifted nervously. They'd expected an easy job: intimidate a rancher, collect a wayward wife. They hadn't bargained on facing men who'd fought Apaches and rustlers, who'd carved civilization from raw wilderness with nothing but grit and gunpowder. "Jake," Nathan called without taking his eyes off the sheriff. "Show the good lawman your shoulder." Jake stepped forward, pulling aside his shirt to reveal the blood-soaked bandages. "Took this bullet 2 nights ago. Sheriff, from men wearing masks who set fire to Cougar Creek shack. Pete saw it all. If you need another witness." The sheriff's discomfort visibly increased. He was a political animal, used to balancing the interests of powerful men, but attempted murder was harder to sweep aside than domestic disputes. "That's got nothing to do with me," Jonathan protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "If criminals are using this situation for their own ends, criminals in your employ," Nathan stated flatly. "Or are you telling me it's coincidence that professional gunmen just happened to target my ranch while you're in town waving money around?" Margaret watched Jonathan's face cycle through emotions: rage, frustration, and something that might have been fear. He'd never faced real opposition before, never had his will thwarted by someone he couldn't buy or intimidate. In St. Louis, his money and social position had made him untouchable. Here, faced with Nathan Wade's iron will and loyal men, those advantages crumbled like sand. "Margaret." Jonathan tried a different tack, his voice shifting to the honeyed tone she remembered too well. "Darling, please, think of your family, your father's debts. I can still ruin them. Your sister's marriage prospects, your mother's health. Don't make them suffer for your stubbornness." The words hit her like physical blows, each one calculated to find her weaknesses. Her family, the chain that had bound her to him in the first place. She felt Nathan tense beside her, saw his free hand clench into a fist, but he held his peace. This was her battle to fight. "My family sold me to you like livestock," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "They made their choice. I've made mine, and if you harm them, Jonathan, I'll make sure everyone from St. Louis to San Francisco knows exactly what kind of man you really are. Every cruel word, every blow, every locked door. Your reputation won't survive the truth. You wouldn't dare. Try me." She stepped forward, past Nathan's protective presence, until she stood alone in the space between the two groups. "I've already lost everything I thought mattered. My home, my family, my good name. You took all that, but you made one mistake. Jonathan, you left me alive, and a woman with nothing left to lose is a dangerous thing." The silence stretched taut as she reached into her pocket, pulling out a small leather journal. "Every incident, every injury, every degradation, it's all here. Names, dates, witnesses among your own servants who saw more than you knew. I've already sent copies to lawyers in 3 cities. If anything happens to me, to Mr. Wade, to anyone on this ranch, or to my family, those documents will be published in every major newspaper that will print them." It was a bluff. Partially. She had the journal, had recorded everything with the obsessive detail of someone trying to prove their own sanity. But the copies, the lawyers, those were fabrications born of desperation. Yet, looking at her, standing straight-backed in the scorching sun, no one would have guessed she held anything but a royal flush. Jonathan's facade finally cracked completely. "You vindictive little—" He reached for something in his coat, and instantly every gun in the yard swung toward him. The sheriff's men, Nathan's cowboys, even some of Jonathan's own hired guns, all recognized the moment when words might turn to bullets. "Easy," the sheriff warned, his own hand on his pistol. "Nobody do anything foolish." But it wasn't a weapon Jonathan pulled out. It was another document. "A writ," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "Signed by a federal judge in St. Louis, declaring my wife mentally incompetent, requiring her return to my custody for her own protection." Nathan laughed, the sound cutting through the tension like a blade. "A federal judge in St. Louis has no jurisdiction over a woman standing free in Wyoming territory. And I'd like to see you try to prove mental incompetence when she's been working my ranch, keeping books, and making better strategic decisions than half the men here. I have witnesses who'll testify." "Bought witnesses," Margaret interrupted, "against the testimony of everyone on this ranch who's seen me daily for months. against the word of Nathan Wade, whose reputation in this territory is worth more than all your St. Louis money. She turned to address the sheriff directly. Sheriff Watson, I'm prepared to go before any legitimate court in this territory. I'll answer any questions, submit to any examination, but I will not be dragged back to St. Louis like property. If Mr. Hartley wants to pursue this legally, let him do it here, in the open, where his money can't buy the outcome. The sheriff looked between them all, Jonathan red-faced with fury, Nathan steady as granite, Margaret standing like a figure from a Greek tragedy, beautiful and terrible in her defiance. Around them, armed men waited for the word that would unleash violence. Mr. Hartley, the sheriff said slowly, I think the ladies made a fair offer. The territorial court sits next month. You can present your case then, all legal and proper. Until then, I'm ordering all parties to keep the peace. This is outrageous, Jonathan exploded. I have rights. And so does Mr. Wade. The sheriff cut him off. The right to defend his property from armed assault. The right to have his employees not shot. The right to run his ranch without interference. You want to talk about rights? Mr. Hartley? Let's start with those. Margaret saw the moment Jonathan realized he'd overplayed his hand. The hired guns he'd brought were already calculating whether his money was worth facing Nathan Wade's men in their own territory. The sheriff, while susceptible to influence, couldn't ignore open warfare in his jurisdiction. And Margaret herself had proven she was no longer the frightened girl he'd terrorized in St. Louis. This isn't over, he said, but the threat lacked teeth. No, Nathan agreed quietly. It's not. There's still the matter of damages to my property and injury to my men. I'll be filing charges. Hartley, and unlike your bought judge in St. Louis, the law here tends to favor men who build over those who destroy. The standoff broke like a fever. Jonathan wheeled his horse around, spurring it viciously. His hired men followed, their relief palpable. Even some of the sheriff's posse looked grateful to be leaving without bloodshed. Sheriff Watson lingered a moment. Wade, Miss Sullivan, try to keep this peaceful until court. I'd hate to have to come back here with more men. We never wanted anything but peace, Nathan replied. But we'll defend what's ours. Make sure Hartley understands that. As the dust settled from their departure, Margaret felt her knees buckle. Nathan caught her before she could fall, his arm strong around her waist. You did well, he murmured. Brilliant play with the journal. She laughed shakily. Half of it was bluff. The best plays always are. He helped her to the porch, where Mrs. Chen appeared with water and worried exclamations. Around them, the ranch slowly returned to its rhythms, though men kept weapons close and eyes on the horizon. He'll try again, Margaret said as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. Not openly, but he'll find another way. He can't bear to lose. Then we'll be ready, Nathan said simply. He was quiet for a moment, then added, that took courage, standing up to him like that, facing down the past without flinching. I had to, not just for me, but for everyone here who's risked themselves for a stranger's trouble. She met his eyes, seeing in them something that made her heart race. You gave me the strength to stand. You and this place, you always had the strength, he corrected gently. You just needed a place to plant your feet. As darkness crept across the desert, bringing blessed coolness, they sat together on the porch, not touching, but close enough to feel each other's presence like a shield against the night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, legal battles, perhaps more violence, certainly more of Jonathan's schemes. But tonight, Margaret Sullivan sat free under the vast western sky, surrounded by people who'd chosen to stand with her. The girl who'd once cowered behind locked doors had faced her demon in broad daylight and refused to yield. The war wasn't over, but she'd won her first true battle. And in the growing connection between her and Nathan Wade, she sensed the possibility of something stronger than fear, more enduring than pain, something that might, impossibly, be called hope. The storm struck just after midnight, not with rain, but with fire and lead. Margaret jolted awake to the sound of breaking glass and men shouting. The acrid smell of smoke already filled the air as flames licked at the barn's walls, casting dancing shadows across the yard. "They're coming from the North Ridge," Tom's voice rang out above the chaos. "At least 20 riders." Margaret grabbed the rifle beside her bed, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. She'd known Jonathan wouldn't accept defeat, wouldn't wait for any court to decide her fate. This was his final gambit. Overwhelming force in the dead of night. When law and witnesses meant nothing, the house erupted into organized chaos. Nathan's voice carried above the din, directing men with the calm efficiency of a battlefield commander. "Samuel, take 5 men and protect the water supply. Rosa, Margaret, upstairs windows. Cover the yard. Miguel, get those horses out before the barn goes." Margaret raced up the stairs, Rosa close behind. Through the windows, she could see muzzle flashes from the attacking forces. Professional gunmen who moved with military precision. This wasn't the half-hearted harassment of before. This was war. "There," Rosa pointed to shadows creeping along the corral fence. Margaret sighted down her rifle, remembering Nathan's lessons about leading a moving target. The weapon bucked against her shoulder, and one shadow stumbled and fell. Below, Nathan and his men had formed defensive positions, using overturned wagons and water troughs as cover. The firefight raged with deadly intensity, the night air filled with the whine of bullets and the screams of horses. "The house!" someone shouted. Margaret turned to see flames spreading from the barn to the nearby storage sheds. If the fire reached the main house, they'd be forced into the open, easy targets for the rifles on the ridge. Without thinking, she abandoned her position and ran downstairs. In the kitchen, she found Mrs. Chen already organizing a bucket brigade. "We need everyone we can spare," the older woman said grimly. "That wind will push the fire straight to us." Margaret joined the line, passing buckets with desperate efficiency. Her arms burned with effort, her dress soaked with water and sweat, but she didn't slow. Around her, others did the same, cowboys and house servants working together against the common threat. A figure burst through the smoke, and Margaret raised her rifle instinctively. But it was Jake, his face blackened with soot. "They're trying to flank us from the east. Mister, Wade needs every gun on the line." Margaret looked at the advancing fire, then at the defensive line where Nathan fought to hold back the attackers. An impossible choice. Save the ranch or save the people? "Go!" "Mrs." Chen said firmly. "We'll handle the fire. Go!" Margaret ran toward the fighting, dodging between cover as bullets sparked off rocks and fence posts. She found Nathan behind an overturned freight wagon, blood seeping from a graze on his temple. "You should be inside," he said without looking at her, firing steadily at the muzzle flashes on the ridge. "The house doesn't matter if we're all dead," she replied, dropping beside him. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough. They've got us pinned from 2 sides, and that fire's going to drive us into the open soon." He glanced at her then, his eyes fierce in the firelight. "Whatever happens, you don't let them take you. Promise me that." Before she could answer, a new sound rose above the battle, the thunder of hooves from the south. Margaret's heart sank. More attackers. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and running out of ammunition. But the war cry that split the night wasn't from hired guns. It was Apache, fierce, primal, and absolutely unexpected. A band of riders swept into the yard, not attacking the ranch but falling on the gunmen from behind. Margaret recognized the lead rider, Joseph Two Eagles, whose family Nathan had helped through a harsh winter 2 years ago. "Thought you might need help. Wade!" Joseph called out, his rifle speaking thunder as he rode. The tide turned in minutes, caught between the ranch's defenders and the unexpected Apache allies. The attackers' disciplined assault crumbled into chaos. Men fled into the darkness, pursued by riders who knew every trail and gulch in the territory. But the fire still raged, and now Margaret could see a figure silhouetted against the flames. Jonathan, his fine clothes torn and stained, a pistol in his hand. He wasn't fleeing with his hired guns. He was coming for her, his face twisted with the madness of a man who'd lost everything to his obsession. "You've destroyed me," he screamed above the roar of flames. "My reputation, my fortune, all spent trying to retrieve what's mine. If I can't have you, no one will." He raised the pistol, and time seemed to slow. Margaret saw Nathan moving to shield her, too far away to make it in time. Saw Jonathan's finger tighten on the trigger. Saw her death in his eyes. The shot was impossibly loud, echoing off the mountains. But Margaret felt no impact, no pain. Instead, she watched Jonathan's expression shift from triumph to confusion as he looked down at the spreading red stain on his shirt. Behind him, Sheriff Watson lowered his smoking rifle. "That's enough, Hartley. More than enough." Jonathan fell to his knees, the pistol dropping from nerveless fingers. "She's mine," he whispered, and then toppled forward into the dust. The sheriff's posse spread through the yard, late but official, rounding up what remained of the attacking force. Watson himself approached Nathan and Margaret, his face grim. "Got word from Joseph Two Eagles about trouble heading this way," he explained. "Came as fast as we could. Looks like we were almost too late." Margaret stared at Jonathan's still form, waiting to feel something. Relief, triumph, even pity. But all she felt was empty, as if a chapter of her life had closed with his death, leaving blank pages ahead. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The legal part might take some sorting," Watson admitted. "But Hartley's dead. His men are scattered or captured, and I've got plenty of witnesses to self-defense and attempted murder. Yeah, I'd say it's over." The fire was under control now. The barn lost, but the house saved. Men emerged from cover, wounded but alive, their faces reflecting exhaustion and grim satisfaction. Joseph. Two Eagles dismounted, clasping hands with Nathan in the warrior's grip of mutual respect. Debt paid. Joseph said simply, "More than paid." Nathan replied, "We owe you." Joseph's smile was sharp as a blade. "Wade helped my people when no other white man would. This makes us even." He glanced at Margaret with knowing eyes. "Besides, any enemy of a man who'd cage a woman is enemy of mine." As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Margaret stood amid the wreckage of the night's battle. The ranch was scarred but standing. Good men were hurt but healing, and the shadow that had haunted her for so long lay still in the dust, its power broken forever. Nathan appeared beside her, his arm in a sling but his eyes clear. "You're free," he said simply. "Truly free. The question now is what you'll do with that freedom." She looked around at the ranch, at the men who'd risked their lives for her, at Mrs. Chen organizing the cleanup with her usual efficiency, at Rosa tending the wounded with gentle hands. Then she looked at Nathan, this man who had offered her sanctuary and asked nothing in return, who'd stood between her and harm again and again. "I thought I knew what freedom meant," she said slowly. "I thought it meant running, hiding, being alone. But that's not freedom. That's just another kind of prison." She met his eyes, seeing in them the same recognition that dawned in her heart. Freedom means choosing where you stand and who you stand with. And I choose here. I choose this place, these people. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I choose you, if you'll have me." Nathan's weathered face softened with an emotion she'd never seen there before. "I'm not an easy man. Margaret, I've got my own ghosts, my own scars. This ranch is hard living, and there'll always be another fight, another challenge. I'm not looking for easy," she replied. "I'm looking for real, for honest. For a place where I can plant seeds and watch them grow without fear of someone tearing them up." She gestured at the battle-scarred yard. "Even if that place needs some repairs first." He laughed then, the sound rusty but genuine. "Well, we've got plenty of work ahead of us. Barn to rebuild, fences to mend, authorities to deal with." His hand found hers, calloused fingers gentle. "But we'll do it together, all of us." As the sun climbed higher, burning away the smoke and shadow of night, Margaret Sullivan stood free on the land that had become her salvation. The girl who'd once trembled and threatened death to any who touched her had found her strength, her place, her people. And in the growing light of a new day, she began to understand that sometimes the greatest courage isn't in running or fighting, but in choosing to stay and build something worth defending. 6 months had passed since the night of fire and lead, and the Double W Ranch bore new scars alongside the old. The rebuilt barn stood proud against the sky, its fresh timber golden in the afternoon sun, where violence had torn the earth. New grass grew green and hopeful, and in the kitchen garden, Margaret Sullivan, soon to be Margaret Wade, knelt among rows of vegetables that flourished under her care. She paused in her work, sitting back on her heels to survey the changes that half a year had wrought. The ranch bustled with life and purpose. Cowboys went about their duties with easy confidence, no longer needing to keep weapons always at hand. Laughter rang out from the bunkhouse, where Tom was losing another hand of cards to Miguel. Even the horses seemed calmer, grazing peacefully in pastures that had once echoed with gunfire. "You'll wear out the dirt if you keep fussing with it." Nathan's voice came from behind her, warm with the gentle teasing that had become common between them. She turned to find him watching from the garden gate, his stance relaxed in a way that would have been impossible during those dark days. The constant vigilance had eased from his shoulders, though his eyes still carried that watchful quality that marked a man who'd known too much loss to take peace for granted. "The tomatoes need attention," she replied, brushing soil from her hands. "Mrs. Chen wants them perfect for the harvest celebration." "Everything you touch turns out perfect," he said, moving into the garden with the careful steps of a man who'd learned to respect growing things. "The books haven't been this well kept in years. Samuel says you've got a better head for numbers than his previous 3 bookkeepers combined." Margaret felt warmth bloom in her chest, not from the praise, but from the simple domesticity of the moment. Here was Nathan Wade, the man who'd faced down armies for her, admiring her vegetables and ledger work with equal sincerity. "I had a good teacher," she said, remembering the patient hours he'd spent showing her the ranch's operations, treating her as a partner rather than a decoration. He reached down to help her stand, and she no longer flinched from the contact. His hands were gentle, respectful, offering support without possession. It had taken months to unlearn the fear, to understand that not all strength meant violence, not all touch meant harm. "The circuit preacher will be here next week," he said, his thumb brushing over the simple gold band on her finger, his mother's ring, offered with trembling hands and accepted with tears of joy. "If you're still willing to make this official, Nathan Wade," she said with mock severity. "Are you suggesting I might change my mind about marrying the most stubborn, protective, impossibly honorable man in the territory?" His laugh rumbled deep in his chest. "When you put it that way, I sound like quite the catch." "You are," she said simply, seriously. "You gave me back my life. More than that, you showed me a life worth living." They stood close in the garden, surrounded by the growing things she'd planted and tended. It struck her how far they'd both come. The bitter widower who'd built walls of work and wealth around his heart, and the terrified girl who'd threatened death rather than endure another touch. They'd found healing in unlikely soil. 2 damaged souls learning that some wounds could scar over strong if given the chance. "I have something for you," Nathan said, producing an envelope from his jacket. It came with the supply wagon from town. Margaret recognized the handwriting immediately, her sister's careful script, with trembling hands. She opened the letter, scanning the contents while Nathan watched with quiet concern. "They're well," she whispered, tears starting in her eyes. "Jonathan's death freed them from his financial hold. Father's found work, honest work. And Catherine, she's to be married, to a school teacher who loves her for herself, not her dowry." She pressed the letter to her chest. "They want to visit, if we'll have them." "Of course we'll have them," Nathan said immediately. "This is your home. Your family will always be welcome." Home. The word settled around her like a warm blanket. Not just a place of refuge anymore, but truly home, where she had work that mattered, people who valued her, and a future stretching bright ahead. "There's something else," Nathan said, his tone shifting to something more tentative. "I've been thinking about the empty land to the south. Good soil, water access, perfect for a school." Margaret's breath caught. "A school? You said you wanted to teach once. Seems a shame to waste that dream. We've got plenty of ranch children growing up wild, and the town's been talking about needing a proper schoolhouse." He met her eyes, that rare, soft smile playing at his lips. "Thought maybe Mrs. Wade might want to add teacher to her list of titles." She launched herself at him, propriety forgotten in the surge of joy. He caught her easily, spinning her around while she laughed and cried simultaneously. When he set her down, she kissed him soundly, tasting sunshine and possibility on his lips. "Yes," she said against his mouth. "Yes to all of it, to the school, the marriage, the future. Yes to everything." As if summoned by their happiness, others began gathering in the yard. Mrs. Chen appeared with a knowing smile and a tray of cool drinks. Rosa brought out her guitar, filling the air with a gentle melody. Samuel and the cowboys drifted over from their work, drawn by the music and the sense of celebration. "To new beginnings," Tom raised his cup in an impromptu toast. "And to the folks brave enough to make them. To the double W," Miguel added, "where even the wildest storms can't break what we build together." Margaret looked around at these people who'd become family, who'd risked everything for a stranger's freedom. She thought of Joseph Two Eagles, who'd returned her faith in unexpected allies, of Sheriff Watson, who'd chosen justice over politics when it mattered most, even of Jonathan, whose death had finally freed both of them from the prison of their shared past. "To choosing where we stand," she said, raising her own cup, "and who we stand with." The sun was setting now, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. In the distance, cattle lowed their evening chorus. The windmill turned lazily in the breeze, pumping life-giving water to the land. And in the heart of the ranch, people gathered in fellowship, their laughter rising to meet the first stars. Margaret leaned against Nathan's solid warmth, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her hand. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, a ranch to run, a school to build, a marriage to nurture. There would be droughts and storms, conflicts and losses. The West didn't coddle its children, even those who'd found sanctuary in its vast spaces. But tonight, she was simply Margaret Sullivan, soon to be Margaret Wade, a woman who'd fled across a continent with terror at her heels and found something she'd never dared dream of. Not just safety, but purpose. Not just protection, but partnership. Not just survival, but love. The girl who'd once promised death to anyone who touched her now rested easy in the arms of a man who'd proven that some touches could heal rather than harm. And as the stars emerged in all their desert brilliance, she knew that every scar, every mile, every moment of fear had been worth it to reach this place of peace. "What are you thinking?" Nathan asked softly, his breath stirring her hair. "That sometimes," she said. "The very thing we run from leads us exactly where we need to be." His arms tightened around her, and she felt his smile against her temple. "Then here's to the running," he murmured, "and to the finding, but mostly to the staying." As music and laughter filled the evening air, Margaret Sullivan Wade closed her eyes and let herself truly believe what her heart had been trying to tell her for months. She was home, she was loved, and the future, which had once seemed like a threat to be avoided, now spread before her bright with promise, in the wild heart of Wyoming territory, where the mountains touched the sky and courage was measured in more than bullets. 2 wounded souls had found their way to wholeness, and if that wasn't a miracle worth celebrating, Margaret didn't know what was. The West had tested them with fire and lead, with drought and human cruelty, but they'd proven what Nathan had told her all those months ago. Some things were worth any price, and the greatest of those was the freedom to choose your own path, to build your own life, and to love without fear. The night deepened, wrapping the ranch in its gentle embrace, and Margaret Sullivan Wade, teacher-to-be, rancher's wife, survivor and thriver, finally understood what the poets meant when they wrote of coming home. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. If you're enjoying these tales of courage, redemption, and romance in the American frontier, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please drop a comment below, and let's connect across the miles. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more authentic Western stories that capture the heart and spirit of those who dared to dream under the vast prairie skies. Share your thoughts about Margaret and Nathan's journey. Did their story touch your heart as much as it touched mine?